They say the dead rest in peace. But that night, when a phone buried under 15 years of cold dirt started ringing right in my kitchen, I knew the truth had never died. I knew the person trying to bury me was still alive and very much in a hurry. But this time, I am no longer the one being pushed into the pit. I am the one holding the shovel. My name is Eleanor Briggs, and at 58 years old, I have learned that silence is not empty. It is heavy. It has a weight that settles into the floorboards of this sprawling Victorian house in Rosefield, Montana, pressing down until the wood groans under the pressure of memory. Since my husband passed, and more significantly, since my son Michael was taken from me 15 years ago in a car accident that left nothing behind but a closed casket and a lifetime of questions, I have lived in this mausoleum of grief. The house is too big for one woman. It echoes with the sounds of a life that ended nearly 2 decades ago, trapping me in a loop of cold nights and solitary dinners. But solitude was preferable to the alternative. The alternative was Savannah Briggs. My daughter-in-law arrived just after 6 in the evening, bringing with her a gust of winter air and that distinctive scent of expensive perfume that always seemed to mask the smell of something rotting. She did not visit out of love. Savannah visited to inspect her investment. She walked through my living room, running a manicured finger along the dust of the mantelpiece, her eyes scanning the furniture not with nostalgia, but with the calculating gaze of an appraiser. She had been Michael's wife for only 2 years before the crash, yet she wore the title of the grieving widow like a crown, one that she believed entitled her to my kingdom. We sat in the kitchen, the fluorescent light humming above us. Savannah slid a thick stack of documents across the granite island. Her voice was soft, the kind of practiced softness one uses on a frightened animal or a senile relative. She wanted power of attorney. She wanted control of the estate trusts. She claimed it was to help me, to alleviate the burden of managing such a large portfolio alone. When I pushed the papers back toward her, her mask slipped. The sweetness curdled instantly. She stood up, slamming her leather handbag onto the counter. "Grow up. Eleanor." She spat, her eyes narrowing into slits. "You are drowning in this house, holding on to ghosts. It is pathetic. Sign the papers, or you will lose everything to taxes and your own incompetence." She stormed out before I could respond, the slam of the heavy oak front door shaking the house foundation. I stood there in the kitchen, my hands trembling, the silence rushing back in to fill the space she left. I was not incompetent. I was grieving. There is a difference. That was when I heard it. It was a sound that did not belong in this decade. A sharp, monophonic trill. It was not the sleek, melodic hum of a modern smartphone. It was a harsh, digital chirp that I had not heard in 15 years. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked around the empty kitchen. The sound was coming from the upper cabinet above the refrigerator, a space I had not opened since the funeral. I dragged the step stool over, my legs feeling like lead. The ringing persisted, demanding and impossible. I reached up and pulled open the cabinet door. There, sitting amidst a layer of grey dust, was a silver flip phone. The casing was scratched. I knew those scratches. I knew them because I had made them myself when I dropped it on the hospital floor the night Michael died. I knew this phone because I had placed it into my son's cold hands inside his coffin. I had watched the lid close. I had watched them lower him 6 feet into the earth. The phone should be rotting underground. It should be dead. Yet, it vibrated against the wood. alive and urgent. I picked it up. The device felt freezing against my palm. I flipped it open, my thumb finding the answer button by muscle memory. I brought it to my ear, expecting static, expecting a prank, expecting nothing. "Mom," the voice whispered. The world tilted. The kitchen dissolved. It was him. It was unmistakable. It was the voice of a 20-year-old boy, preserved in amber, exactly as it sounded the last time he told me he loved me. "Don't sign anything," he said, his voice cracking with a terrifying urgency. "They are not who you think they are." The line went dead. I stood on the step stool, clutching a device that belonged to a corpse, staring at the blank wall. The silence of the house was gone, replaced by a roar of blood in my ears. My son was dead. I saw the body. I saw the grave. But the phone in my hand was warm from the battery, and the voice in my ear had been real. I looked at the darkened window, where my reflection stared back, pale and horrified. Someone was playing a game with my sanity, or I had just stumbled onto a nightmare that had been waiting 15 years to wake up. Logic dictates that the dead do not make phone calls. Therefore, the device in my hand was a weapon, not a miracle. My mind raced through the possibilities as I sat at the kitchen island, staring at the silver flip phone. Was it a recording? A sophisticated hacker using voice synthesis? Or was it simply a cruel prank orchestrated by someone who knew exactly where to stick the knife? But the phone itself was the anomaly. It was physical matter that should have been decomposing 6 feet under the soil of the Rosefield Cemetery. I am not a woman prone to flights of fancy. For 3 decades, I served as a senior legal coordinator for the Rutherford and Hale Compliance Bureau. My job was to find the lie buried in the mountain of truth. I spent my life reading fine print, spotting the single inconsistent clause in a 1,000-page merger agreement. People think widowhood softens you, that grief makes you porous and easily manipulated. Savannah certainly thought so. She mistook my silence for senility. I pulled the stack of documents she had left on the counter back toward me. Under the harsh kitchen light, I stopped being a grieving mother and became the auditor I used to be. The header read, "Durable Power of Attorney," a standard document for aging relatives. But as I read the clauses, the legal traps became glaringly obvious. Section 4. Paragraph 3 contained a provision that allowed the agent to liquidate real estate assets without prior consultation if deemed in the best interest of the principal. It was not a safety net. It was a license to sell my home out from under me. Michael was my only child. When he died at 20, the world ended. Savannah, his young bride of barely 2 years, wept loudly at the funeral and then quietly cashed the life insurance check. But the family trust, the bulk of the Briggs estate, remained locked until my death. She had been patient. She had played the role of the dutiful daughter-in-law for 15 years, waiting for me to fade. But I was not fading fast enough for her. The call forced me to re-examine the last few weeks. The anomalies were there, but I had dismissed them as the forgetfulness of age. 2 days ago, I found a smear of dried mud in the garage near the breaker box. It was a boot print, too small to be mine, too aggressive to be a guest's. Last week, my bank called regarding a login attempt from an unauthorized device. I had blamed a glitch. Now, I saw the pattern. Someone was testing the perimeter. Someone was already inside. I could not sleep. I took the phone upstairs to my bedroom and set it on the nightstand. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Michael's voice. "They are not who you think they are." It was not just the words. It was the pitch, the specific crack in his voice when he was scared. No hacker could replicate the tremor of a terrified son speaking to his mother. At 2 a.m, the sound of the front door unlatching pulled me from my thoughts. I did not turn on the light. I slipped out of bed and stood in the shadows of the hallway landing. Below, a flashlight beam cut through the darkness of the foyer. It moved with purpose, heading straight for my study. I crept down the stairs, my heart pounding against my ribs, until I could see into the room. Savannah was there. She was not checking to see if I had fallen or if I needed water. She was at my mahogany desk, rifling through the drawers. She moved with a frantic energy, flipping through my private files, snapping photos of documents with her smartphone. She looked nothing like the concerned relative she pretended to be. In the pale glow of her flashlight, her face was twisted with greed and impatience. She left 10 minutes later, locking the door behind her. I stood in the dark study, the scent of her perfume lingering like a poison cloud. I looked at the drawer she had raided. It contained the original deed to the house and Michael's death certificate. She was checking her paperwork. She was preparing to erase me. I went back upstairs and picked up the silver phone. I was done crying. If Savannah wanted a fight, she would find that I was far more dangerous than the ghost she thought she was burying. Savannah arrived at 7 p.m, carrying a bottle of red wine that cost more than my weekly grocery budget and a plastic container of takeout from the Italian place downtown. She claimed she wanted to treat me, to discuss our future with a clear head. But as she poured the wine, her hand shook just enough to spill a single crimson drop onto my white tablecloth. That drop spread like a fresh wound, and I watched her dab at it with a napkin, her movements jerky and frantic. There was a sheen of sweat on her upper lip. Despite the house being kept at a chilly 65 degrees, she looked like a woman running out of time. We ate in silence for 10 minutes before she slid a new folder across the table. This one was not titled Power of Attorney. It was labeled Voluntary Care Proxy. It was a masterpiece of legal manipulation, softer in language but deadlier in intent. The clauses were buried deep in the text, designed to strip me of my autonomy under the guise of medical necessity. If I signed this, Savannah could declare me mentally unfit with the signature of a single doctor on her payroll and ship me off to a facility within 24 hours. I decided to play the part she expected. I let my hand tremble as I reached for my reading glasses. I squinted at the pages, murmuring about how the font was too small and my eyes were getting worse. I saw her shoulders relax. She thought she had won. She thought the old woman was finally crumbling. Then, the sound returned. It was muffled this time, coming from the coat closet near the foyer. That harsh, digital chirp sliced through the dining room air. I froze. I had hidden the phone in the pocket of my old winter coat, the one I had not worn since the previous winter. Savannah dropped her fork. It clattered against the china plate, loud as a gunshot. "What is that?" she asked, her voice tight. I did not answer. I pushed my chair back and walked toward the closet. My heart was hammering a rhythm against my ribs that felt dangerous. I fumbled with the doorknob, the ringing growing louder, more insistent. I reached into the wool coat and pulled out the silver device. I flipped it open. "Mom." Michael's voice came through, breathless and terrified. "They lied about me. Do not trust her. She knows." The line went dead just as Savannah appeared in the doorway. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and recognition. She knew that ringtone. She had heard it 1,000 times when they were dating. "Give me that phone," she demanded. She stepped forward, her hand outstretched. "Who is calling you on a burner phone?" "Eleanor." I clutched the phone to my chest, feigning a gasp. I leaned against the doorframe, pressing a hand to my forehead. I told her I felt dizzy, that my heart was fluttering again. I told her I needed to lie down immediately and that she had to leave. The panic in my performance was real, even if the cause was different. Savannah hesitated. She looked at the phone, then at me, calculating the risk. Finally, she grabbed her purse. She told me she would call in the morning, but her eyes lingered on the pocket where I had shoved the phone. As soon as her taillights disappeared down the driveway, I grabbed my keys and a flashlight. I did not go to bed. I drove to the cemetery. The gates were locked at night, but I knew a gap in the old iron fence on the south side. I scrambled through, tearing my pant leg, ignoring the ache in my knees. I navigated the rows of headstones by memory until I reached the family plot. The beam of my flashlight cut through the dark and landed on Michael's grave. I fell to my knees. The grass was there, but it was wrong. The sod had been replaced haphazardly, the edges not quite knitting together with the surrounding earth. I dug my fingers into the soil. It was loose. Ground that has settled for 15 years should be hard as stone, packed tight by winter snows and summer rains. This dirt came up in soft, dark clumps. Someone had been here. Recently. I shone the light at the base of the headstone. There was a deep groove in the earth, a depression that suggested heavy machinery or a sinking foundation. The ground had not just been disturbed, it had been excavated and filled back in. I stared at the grave of my son, realizing the horrific truth. The coffin was not where we had left it. Someone had opened the earth, and whatever was down there now was not the peace I had prayed for. It was a crime scene. I needed a shark. So I called Charlotte Avery. She was a private investigator for 30 years before her hip gave out, but her mind remained as sharp as a serrated blade. She arrived at my back door at 4 a.m, carrying a battered laptop and a thermos of black coffee. We did not waste time with pleasantries or tears. I handed her the silver phone. She plugged it into her system with a cable she fished out of her bag, her fingers flying across the keyboard with a terrifying familiarity. The signal was not ghost magic. It was technology. Charlotte traced the triangulation to a cell tower pinging off Harper Ridge, a desolate stretch of mountains 2 hours north of town. I knew the area. It used to house the Crestview Recovery Center, a private facility that was shut down a decade ago after a patient abuse scandal. The building was supposed to be abandoned, a rotting husk in the middle of nowhere. Yet, that was where the signal originated. That was where my dead son was calling from. While the tracking software ran its course, I pulled the old file boxes from the attic. I laid out the police report from Michael's accident on the kitchen table. For 15 years, I had been too grief-stricken to look at the details, trusting the official narrative. Now, I looked at them with cold, dry eyes. The anomalies jumped out immediately. The skid marks in the crime scene photos did not match the trajectory of the vehicle. The time of death on the coroner's report was listed as 11 at night, but the witness statement said the crash happened at midnight. There was an entire hour unaccounted for, a missing hour where my son was supposedly dead, yet somehow not properly documented. Charlotte spun her laptop around to face me. She had run the audio from the voicemail through a biometric voice analysis program she still had access to. The screen flashed a bright green bar, 98% match. It was Michael. It was not a recording from the past, and it was not a simulation. The cadence, the stress on the vowels, the specific way he breathed between words. It was him. Then came the footage. Charlotte had bypassed the security server of the cemetery, a system so outdated it barely had a firewall. She scrubbed the timeline back to last Tuesday. The video was grainy and black and white, but the image was clear enough to stop my heart. 2 figures were near the Briggs plot. They were not mourning. They were digging. They worked quickly, unearthing the soil and prying open the lid of the casket. They did not take a body out. They took something small, a box or a file. I could not tell. Then they filled it back in, smoothing the earth to hide their crime. My stomach turned. The grave had been used as a safe deposit box. Charlotte kept digging, this time into the financials. She found a dormant account linked to Michael's old social security number. It should have been closed upon the issuance of a death certificate. Instead, there were transactions, small ones, $5, $10, just enough to keep the account active without flagging the bank's fraud algorithms. They had been happening for 15 years. Someone was keeping his identity on life support. My own phone buzzed on the table, vibrating so hard it rattled against the wood. It was Savannah. The text message preview popped up. "We need to talk. Now. Do not do anything stupid. Eleanor." She called again immediately. I watched the screen light up with her name. She sounded desperate. She sounded dangerous. I looked at Charlotte. She closed her laptop and nodded once. We both understood the reality of the situation. This was not just a family dispute over an inheritance. This was a conspiracy that had been running in the background of my life for a decade and a half. I silenced the phone. I was done talking to Savannah. I was done being the mourning mother. The investigation was open, and I was going to finish it. Rutherford and Hale Compliance Bureau was a fortress of glass and steel, but every fortress has a back door for the people who built it. I still possessed my old security clearance card. By all protocols, it should have been deactivated the day I retired, but I knew the head of security was lazy with legacy accounts. At 3 a.m, the card reader beeped green. I slipped into the silent lobby, the air conditioning humming a low, sterile note that felt like a warning. I made my way to the basement archives, a windowless room where the physical servers hummed. I did not need a password to know where the bodies were buried. I logged into the legacy system using an administrative override I had written myself 20 years ago. I typed in Michael Briggs. The screen populated with data. My breath hitched. The file status was not deceased. It was listed as active, restricted access. The audit trail showed dozens of unauthorized entries over the last 15 years. Every single one of them was authorized by a user ID I recognized immediately. Jonah Malin. Jonah had been a junior archivist, a nervous man who always smelled of stale coffee and fear. He had been fired a decade ago for misconduct. If anyone knew the truth, it was him. I found him 2 hours later in a dilapidated shelter on the south side of the city. He was a shadow of the man I remembered. His face was gaunt, ravaged by alcohol and years of sleeping on concrete. When I cornered him in the alley behind the shelter, he tried to run, but his legs were too weak. I grabbed his collar, slamming him against the brick wall. I demanded to know why he was accessing my dead son's file. "He is not dead." "Eleanor." Jonah wheezed. The the smell of cheap whiskey heavy on his breath. He started crying. He never died in that car. The world stopped spinning. I tightened my grip on his jacket. Jonah spilled everything. He told me about the witness preservation variant. It was an off-the-books program run by a rogue faction within the company to make high-value liabilities disappear. Michael had stumbled upon something he was not supposed to see, something illegal involving the firm's international accounts. Instead of killing him, they erased him. They staged the crash. They replaced the body. They put him in a hole so deep no one would ever find him. "And Savannah?" I asked, my voice trembling with a rage I had never known. "She knows," Jonah whispered. "She has known since day one. She took the payout. She signed the consent forms to put him in the program. That is why she needs your signature on those new papers. The trust fund is the only thing keeping the account active. If she controls it, she controls him. She paid me $500 a month to keep quiet, but she stopped paying last week. That is why I logged in. I wanted to see if they had moved him. I felt sick. My daughter-in-law had sold her husband into a living purgatory for a payout and power. She had watched me mourn a patchy box of dirt for 15 years while she cashed checks. "We need to go to the police," I told him, grabbing his arm. We turned to leave the alley, stepping out toward my car. The screech of tires cut through the morning silence. A black van mounted the curb, blocking our path. The side door slid open with a violent metallic rasp. 2 men in ski masks jumped out. I shouted, trying to pull Jonah behind me, but I was not fast enough. One of the men backhanded me across the face. The force of the blow knocked me to the pavement, the taste of copper flooding my mouth. I scrambled to get up, but I was dizzy. Through my blurred vision, I saw them grab Jonah. He screamed, kicking and thrashing, but they threw him into the back of the van like a sack of garbage. The door slammed shut. The van peeled away, leaving the smell of burnt rubber hanging in the cold air. I sat on the asphalt, wiping blood from my split lip. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from clarity. They had taken the only witness. They had hurt me. They thought this would stop me. They were wrong. This was no longer just about a lie. This was a war. And they had just given me the ammunition I needed to burn their entire world to the ground. My phone buzzed against my bruised hip as I stood in the driveway, wiping the blood from my lip. I pulled it out, the screen illuminating the darkness. The message was from a blocked number. "Stop digging, or next time we will not miss." I looked up at my house. The front door was standing wide open, swaying slightly in the freezing wind. I walked inside. They had not come for the silver tea set or the television. The living room was untouched. But my study was a disaster zone. The filing cabinets were overturned. Papers scattered across the floor like snow. They had gutted 20 years of records, searching for whatever leverage I might have found. They were trying to blind me. Charlotte pulled into the driveway a moment later, her tires screeching on the asphalt. She did not look at the wreckage of my home. She looked at her laptop screen, illuminated by the dashboard lights. "Get in!" she shouted. "The signal is moving." I jumped into the passenger seat. The dot on her map was racing north, heading back toward the dense, unforgiving terrain of Harper Ridge. We drove in silence, the speedometer climbing past 80. I gripped the door handle, my knuckles white. The adrenaline was the only thing keeping the pain in my face at bay. The dot stopped moving near an old logging road that had been closed since the 90s. We abandoned the car at the trailhead and moved on foot. The air was biting, sharp with the smell of pine and impending snow. Ahead, through the trees, a faint light flickered. It was a cabin, barely standing, the wood grey and rotting. Charlotte drew a small revolver from her waistband. I did not ask her when she started carrying it. We approached the door. It was unlocked. We burst in. Jonah was there. He was tied to a wooden chair in the center of the room, his head lolling forward. His mouth was duct-taped shut. I rushed to him, tearing the tape away. He gasped for air, his eyes wide with terror. "It is a trap," he wheezed. "You have to leave." "Where is Michael?" I demanded, grabbing his shoulders. "The signal led us here." "He is not here," Jonah cried. They planted the phone on me. "Savannah is not the only one. Eleanor. It is the whole board. It is an organization." Then I smelled it, the sharp, chemical scent of propane. A hissing sound came from the kitchen area. Charlotte grabbed my arm, her grip like iron. "Run," she screamed. We grabbed Jonah, dragging him chair and all toward the door. We threw ourselves out onto the frozen ground, scrambling behind a cluster of boulders just as the world turned white. The explosion was not like in the movies. It was a physical blow. The shockwave punched the air out of my lungs. The cabin disintegrated, splintering into a fireball that lit up the night sky. The heat seared my face. Debris rained down around us, shards of wood, glass, and twisted metal. I lay in the snow, my ears ringing with a high-pitched whine. I looked over at Charlotte. She was checking her laptop, her face grim. "The signal is gone," she said. The phone was in there. They had lured us there to kill us, or at least to destroy the only link I had to my son. I looked at the burning remains of the cabin. Fear should have paralyzed me. Instead, it evaporated. In its place, a cold, hard resolve settled in my chest. I was done chasing ghosts in the woods. I was done playing detective. I stood up, brushing the ash from my coat. "Take Jonah to the hospital," I told Charlotte. "Keep him safe." "Where are you going?" she asked. "I am going to the source," I said. I took Charlotte's car. I drove straight to Savannah's house. I did not knock. I used the spare key Michael had given me 15 years ago, a key she probably thought I had lost. I walked into the living room. She was sitting by the fireplace, a glass of wine in her hand. She did not jump. She did not scream. She looked up at me, her eyes tired, resigning. "You look terrible." "Eleanor," she said. I walked until I was standing directly over her. I wanted to hit her. I wanted to scream. But I spoke with a deadly calm. "I know he is alive. I know about the facility. I know about the explosion. You are going to tell me where he is, or I will burn your life down with the same fire you just tried to use on me." Savannah took a sip of wine. She set the glass down on the coaster. "You are right," she said softly. "He is alive." My knees almost gave out. Hearing her admit it was worse than suspecting it. "But he is not the Michael you remember," she continued, looking into the fire. "And the situation is not what you think. You think you are saving him, Eleanor. But you have no idea what you are actually unleashing. He wanted this. Eleanor. You have to understand that." Savannah swirled the wine in her glass, her eyes fixed on the dancing flames of the fireplace. She spoke with the casual indifference of someone discussing the weather, not the resurrection of a husband. She told me Michael had felt suffocated. She claimed he approached the company, begging for a way out. a way to start over without the pressure of being a Briggs. "You are lying," I said, my voice steady. I stepped closer to her. I told her I knew about the witness preservation variant. I knew about the internal audit logs Jonah had shown me before he was taken. Michael did not volunteer. He stumbled onto the embezzlement scheme the partners were running through offshore shell companies. They did not offer him a fresh start. They abducted him to stop him from going to the SEC. Savannah stopped swirling her glass. She looked up at me, and for the first time, the mask of the grieving widow completely dissolved. Underneath, there was only cold, hard pragmatism. "It does not matter how it started," she said. "What matters is that the Michael you are looking for does not exist anymore. The man in that facility is not the boy you raised. 15 years of isolation and conditioning change a person. He is broken. Eleanor, if you see him, it will destroy you. Take me to him," I said. Savannah set her glass down. She reached into her purse and pulled out the document I had refused to sign earlier. The voluntary care proxy. "You want to see him? Fine, but I need insurance. You sign everything over to me, the house, the trust, the liquid assets, all of it. You sign this, and I will take you to the North Pine Recovery Annex." I looked at the papers. It was a ransom note disguised as a legal contract. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to tear it up. But I needed access. I needed to get inside the fortress. I took the pen from her hand. I made my hand shake, feigning the defeat of an old, tired woman. I signed my name on the dotted line, selling my life to buy my son's freedom. "Good," Savannah said, snatching the papers away. "Get your coat." We drove for an hour into the deep woods, far past the abandoned cabin where Jonah had almost died. We turned onto an unmarked gravel road that wound up the side of a mountain. The facility was not visible from the main road. It was built directly into the rock face, a relic of the Cold War repurpose for private incarceration. A sign read, "North Pine Recovery Annex," in faded letters. Savannah pulled up to a heavy steel gate. She punched a code into the keypad, and the gates groaned open. We drove into an underground garage that smelled of damp earth and bleach. 2 guards met us at the elevator. They were large, silent men in tactical gear. "Hand over your phone and your bag," one of them ordered. I handed over my purse. They patted me down. They missed the small, flat tracking device Charlotte had slipped into the lining of my jacket sleeve back at the trailhead. It was active. It was broadcasting. I just prayed Charlotte was close enough to receive the signal. Savannah led me down a long, sterile corridor. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead. There were doors on either side, heavy steel doors with small reinforced windows. I looked into one as we passed. A man was sitting on a cot, staring at the wall, rocking back and forth. "These are the liabilities," Savannah said, her heels clicking on the concrete. "People who knew too much. People who needed to disappear for the greater good of the company. We keep them comfortable." We reached the end of the hall. There was a single door, isolated from the others. Savannah stopped. She put her hand on the handle, then looked at me with a pity that made my skin crawl. "Remember," she said, "I warned you." She opened the door. The room was small. There was a bed, a toilet, and a small desk bolted to the floor. In the corner, huddled under a thin grey blanket, was a figure. He looked frail. His hair was long and matted. "Michael," I whispered. The figure froze. He turned slowly. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken and wild. But it was him. It was my son. He looked at me with zero recognition at first, and then a flicker of terrified awareness sparked in his eyes. He scrambled backward, pressing himself against the cold cinder-block wall. "Mom," he croaked, his voice sounding like it had not been used in years. "Mom, they said you forgot me. They said you signed the papers to keep me here. Did you—" My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. Savannah stood behind me, silent and victorious. I looked at my son, a broken man who had been told for 15 years that his mother was the jailer. I realized then that Savannah had not just stolen his life. She had stolen his faith in me, and for that, I was going to make sure she never left this mountain. I stepped fully into the damp, windowless cell, and the smell hit me harder than the sight. It was the scent of despair, stale sweat, unwashed linen, and the copper tang of fear. Michael was huddled in the corner, his knees pulled up to his chest. He looked like a skeleton wrapped in grey wool. When I reached out to touch his shoulder, he flinched so violently that he hit his head against the cinder-block wall. "Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking. He squinted at me, his eyes adjusting to the light from the hallway. Then, the recognition turned into a look of absolute betrayal. "They said you forgot me," he stammered, tears cutting tracks through the grime on his face. "They told me you signed the papers. They said you wanted the money more than you wanted me. Did you leave me here?" "No," I choked out, dropping to my knees beside him. I grabbed his cold, trembling hands. "No, Michael, I did not know. I thought you were gone. I swear to you, I thought you were gone." Savannah laughed. It was a sharp, cruel sound that echoed off the concrete walls. She stood in the doorway, checking her watch. "He believes it. Eleanor, that is the beauty of conditioning. We needed him compliant. We needed his signature on the quarterly verification forms to keep the offshore accounts active. A dead man cannot sign, but a hidden man can. He is just a biological key to a very large vault." "You monster!" I spat, rising to my feet. Savannah sighed and nodded to the guard standing behind her. "Restrain her. She has seen enough. We will process her in the adjacent wing." The guard, a man twice my size, lunged forward. He expected an old woman, frail and frozen by shock. He did not expect the adrenaline of a mother who had just found her stolen child. As his hand reached for my arm, I pivoted. I remembered the self-defense course I took after Michael's funeral, a way to channel my grief into something physical. I drove my heel down hard onto his instep, feeling the bones crunch. As he doubled over in pain, I slammed the palm of my hand upward into his nose. He staggered back, blood spurting, blinding him momentarily. Savannah screamed, backing away, but before she could call for backup, the facility's alarm system erupted. A deafening siren wailed, and the emergency lights began to stroke red, bathing the corridor in a nightmare glow. The tracking device. Charlotte had not just been watching, she had been coordinating. "Freeze, police." The shout came from the main corridor. Charlotte came around the corner, not with a laptop this time, but behind the barrel of a shotgun, flanked by Sheriff Miller and 4 armed deputies. The heavy boots of the officers thundered against the concrete floor. Savannah turned to run, her heels slipping on the sleek floor. But there was nowhere to go. Sheriff Miller slammed her against the wall, cuffing her hands behind her back before she could utter a word of protest. The staff members in the hallway, doctors in white coats who were complicit in this atrocity, were scattering like cockroaches, but the deputies were already blocking the exits. I turned back to Michael. He was rocking back and forth, covering his ears against the siren. "It is over," I said, pulling him into my arms. The paramedic team rushed in, pushing past the chaos to get to him. They lifted him onto a stretcher, securing him with straps. He was so light. He felt like a bird made of hollow bones. We moved through the facility, past the open doors of other rooms, past the shouting officers and the weeping Savannah. We emerged from the underground garage into the biting night air of Montana. The sudden rush of fresh oxygen made me dizzy. The spinning lights of the ambulances and police cruisers lit up the forest like a carnival of justice. As they loaded the stretcher into the back of the ambulance, Michael reached out, grabbing the sleeve of my coat. His grip was weak, but his eyes were lucid for the first time. He looked at the trees, then at the sky, and finally at me. "Mom," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the idling engines. "I never died. They made me disappear." I brushed the hair from his forehead, weeping freely now. "I know," I said. "But you are back now, and I am never letting go again. The doctors told me my son was not insane. He was poisoned." The toxicology report read like a chemical warfare manifest. For 15 years. The staff at North Pine had been administering a low-dose cocktail of hallucinogens and sedatives into his food. It was just enough to keep his memory fragmented, to keep him docile, and to make him believe that the outside world was a terrifying delusion. Sitting by his hospital bed, watching the heart monitor trace the rhythm of his life, I felt a guilt so heavy it nearly crushed my ribs. I held his hand, which was scarred and calloused from nervous picking, and I begged him to forgive me. I told him I should have known. I should have dug up the grave the day after the funeral. Michael looked at me, his eyes clearing as the drugs slowly left his system. He squeezed my fingers weakly. He told me not to apologize. He explained how the call happened. Savannah, in her infinite greed, had cut the budget for his medication 2 weeks ago. She wanted to siphon more money from the trust for herself. As the fog in his brain lifted, he realized where he was. He managed to break into the supply closet, where they kept the personal effects of the inmates' trophies of the lives they had stolen. He found his old phone. He charged it for 10 minutes on a stolen cable and dialed the only number he remembered by heart. Sheriff Miller came by the next morning with a grim expression. The investigation had blown the lid off a massive conspiracy. North Pine was not just a kidnapping ring, it was a black site, a corrupted offshoot of a federal witness protection program that had gone rogue in the late 90s. They took people who were inconvenient for major corporations, whistleblowers, witnesses, liabilities, and they stored them away like broken furniture. Rutherford and Hale was just one of their clients. Savannah was not going down quietly. Faced with federal kidnapping charges, she started naming names. She offered up the entire board of directors at my old firm in exchange for a plea deal. She detailed the wire transfers, the shell companies, and the falsified death certificates. She was trying to trade the people she worked for to save her own life. Meanwhile, Jonah Mallon woke up in the ICU. He was burned and broken, but his mind was intact. He gave the FBI the encryption keys to the digital archives he had backed up years ago. It was the smoking gun. It proved that the payouts to Savannah started 3 days before Michael's accident. It proved premeditation. As Michael began to remember small things, the smell of my apple pie, the color of his first car, the sound of his father's laugh, I found myself caught between joy and terror. I watched him relearn how to be human, but at night, I could not sleep. I lay awake, terrified that Savannah's high-priced lawyers would find a loophole. I was terrified that she would cut a deal and walk free in 10 years. The day of the preliminary hearing arrived with a grey, oppressive sky. I dressed in my darkest suit. I needed to look like iron. I needed to look like the wall that would stop her. We entered the courtroom, the air thick with the murmurs of reporters and legal aides. When the bailiff led Savannah in, she was wearing an orange jumpsuit, stripped of her designer clothes and her expensive makeup. She looked smaller, but her eyes were still sharp, scanning the room for an exit that did not exist. I stood in the front row. I wanted her to see me. I wanted her to look into the eyes of the mother she had mocked, the woman she told to grow up. She locked eyes with me, and for a second, I saw a flicker of true fear. She realized that her plea deals and her money might not be enough this time. She realized that I was not just a witness. I was the evidence of her cruelty, and I was going to stand there until the judge buried her under the weight of her own sins. The courtroom was a theater of cruelty, and Savannah was the lead actress. Standing before the jury, she composed her face into a mask of sorrow, pointing a trembling finger at me. She claimed that Rutherford and Hale was my operation, that I had orchestrated Michael's disappearance to shield my own pension fund. She wove a narrative so twisted that for a moment, I saw the jury look at me with suspicion. She was betting on the fact that a grieving widow looks a lot like a guilty conscience if you squint hard enough. Then the heavy oak doors at the back of the room swung open. The silence that followed was instant and absolute. Michael walked in. He was leaning heavily on a cane, his suit hanging loosely on his frame, but his head was high. The gasps from the gallery rippled through the air like a shock wave. Savannah froze mid-sentence. She looked as if she were seeing a ghost, and in a way, she was. Michael took the stand. He did not look at the jury. He looked straight at Savannah. When he spoke, his voice was no longer the terrified whisper from the cell. It was resonant with 15 years of stolen time. "Mom did not abandon me," he said, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. She did not know. But Savannah knew. She signed the papers. She took the money. And she let me rot in the dark while she lived in my house. My lawyer stepped forward, displaying the timeline on the projector. It was a cascade of damning evidence. The wire transfers of $10,000 a month into Savannah's private account. The audio recordings from the bugged office. The signed consent forms for the witness preservation variant with Savannah's signature dated 2 days before the accident. The jury did not need to deliberate. The truth was written in ink and blood. Savannah crumbled. The poised socialite vanished, replaced by a cornered animal. She slammed her fists on the defense table, screaming at the room, her face contorted with rage. "She was supposed to be old," she shrieked, pointing at me. "She was supposed to be weak and senile. She was not supposed to fight back." The judge banged his gavel, silencing her hate. He sentenced Savannah and the 3 surviving board members to consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. As the bailiffs dragged her away, kicking and screaming, I felt the heavy chains of the last 15 years finally snap. Michael stepped down from the witness stand. His legs gave out. But I was there. I caught him. We held each other in the center of the courtroom, surrounded by strangers, sobbing into each other's shoulders. It was the first time I had held my son in a decade and a half, and he felt real. He felt warm. He was alive. We did not go back to Rosefield. The house held too many shadows. We bought a small place near a lake 3 states away, far from the reach of corporations and memories. The recovery was slow. Michael had nightmares, and I still checked the locks 3 times a night. But we were healing. We were learning to trust the silence again. On the 1-year anniversary of his rescue, we walked down to the edge of the water. I had the silver flip phone in my pocket. It was the device that had started the nightmare, and the device that had ended it. I dug a small hole in the soft earth near the reeds. I placed the phone inside, covering it with dirt and packing it down tight. I stood up and looked at Michael, who was skipping stones across the water, a smile finally touching his lips. I realized then that the death of my son had never been the thing that haunted me. It was the theft of his life. But now, he was back. I had taken him back from the grave, and I swore to the wind and the water that I would protect him until my last breath. No one would ever make us disappear again. Thanks so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you guys are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on what you would have done in my shoes. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, hit that like button, and smash the hype button so we can share these stories with even more people. Stay safe out there.